The Defiance line, from what I understand, is a tertiary line of planes made and sold by Stanley during the Depression years. I've read it was aimed at the occasional user, possibly on a farm in rural America. Companies like Stanley do things like this to be able to get some of their money in a market where their primary products, in this case the Bailey and the Bedrock, don't fit in that market very well. The wood seems to be in very good shape, and if you look in here, it's pretty red. So it's either a white wood that's been stained red, or it is a wood that has a natural red tone. But in any case, the wood itself is in good shape, the finish is not. And I think I'm going to spend some time trying to get this finish off and touching up the color and refinishing it. And here are the knob and toe with most of the finish removed. My best guess, this is a white hardwood that's been stained red. This red color doesn't really look very natural. Here are the pieces sanded. Most of the finish is off, and some degree of the red stain is off. In fact, a lot of it's all over my hands. This kind of shows you the problem you have when you try to take a light wood and stain it dark. The face grain here, which is very light, just doesn't take in the stain nearly like the end grain does. So this end grain area is very, very dark, and despite my sanding, I'll be sanding it forever to try to get this as light as that. So my options going forward is I could just finish it as it is and take it as it is, or I could try to even out the tones a little bit by perhaps getting a red stain into the face grain here without getting it into the end grain, something like a red mahogany. Or I could just go with a really dark finish, which would kind of mask the whole thing. Paint it black, in effect. Here's the knob and the tote with one coat of stain kind of sanded out and blended. That looks good. Over here, the tote, not quite so much. This is more brown. Doesn't quite hit the red out here, but at least the overall colors are a little more even. So I have another red oak stain. I'm going to give that a shot. And here's the knob and tote with a coat of red oak, and looks a little splotchy now, but I think once the finish is on that will even out. And the tote, you don't have that giant light stripe. It's not quite as red as the surrounding area, but I think it blends in nicely. There's a few techniques to try to even out the tone when you're trying to take a light wood and stain it to look like a dark wood. One of them is to highly sand the end grain, which is what I did here. I sanded this to 400 grit and then used steel wool on it, and it is very smooth. I mean, this is as smooth as glass, and yet it still sucked up the stain like crazy. So that technique only works to a limited amount. Another way to do it is to seal the wood. If you were down at virgin wood, you could put a sealer on it. The trouble I have with the sealer technique is it doesn't allow the stain to penetrate. So you get a very even stain, but it's not a very dark stain. So I don't think that would have been a good plan. So here's the tote after it's dried with a couple coats of stain on these lighter areas. I have steel wooled it to give it a really silky, smooth finish. It feels really nice in my hand. There's a nice friction to it. It's not tacky. And it looks actually pretty good. And here's the knob, also looking pretty good. Very happy with that. This plane is my user, so I'm not too concerned with how I finish it from here on. And I'm at kind of a decision point. I could go with simply not finishing at all with the oils from my hand. We'll get into the wood and eventually kind of make an oil type finish. That has some historical appropriateness. Another option would be to use a tung oil or a boiled linseed oil finish, and there's nothing wrong with those finishes. It gives you kind of the same silky feel. This is tung oil on raw mahogany, and again, it just feels good. Another option would be to simply wax it, and nothing wrong with that. Again, that would kind of be a variation on just using hand oil to get the eventual finish on it. Then there's always filming types of finishes, and shellac would be one option. I think shellac is a very old finish, so that might be appropriate for an older plane. There's also lacquer. This can be sprayed on. Both shellac and lacquer dry very quickly, so in an afternoon you can build up many coats and get a really nice finish. Then of course, for ultimate durability, there's polyurethanes, probably overkill for a hand tote. The finish would be about as bulletproof as you get, and you don't really need that. A lot of it depends on the look you're going for. One look is to go with this older matte finish that you see on this old plane. I don't know how this came from the factory. I suspect it might have had a shellac on it, but perhaps it was just oiled. And I think it's rosewood, so it's a dark, beautiful wood all on its own. And I think this just looks really nice. On the other end of the spectrum are things like this, where you have a reasonably good-looking wood, perhaps stained, and you have a film finish on it. This is probably a lacquer or a polyurethane that was sprayed on at the factory, and it kind of gives you that plastic encased type of look. You could knock down the gloss with a steel wool, but this is kind of the other end of the spectrum. Here's the tote with a coat of tung oil applied and dried. As I put the tung oil on, it actually removed the stain that was on the face grain. So I'm kind of back to where I began, with a discernible difference in the color of the two grains of the wood. You know, I'm a little disappointed with myself. A stain is not a finish. Some of it soaks into the wood, some of it doesn't. The stuff that doesn't, if you don't wipe it away, it will dry, but it doesn't dry like a finish. It doesn't cross-link, you know, like a lacquer or a polyurethane. If you hit it with a solvent, it'll loosen right up and wipe away, and that's exactly what the tung oil finish did. So, anyway, it's on to plan B. So here's the plane assembled. There's the tote. It looks good. I have several coats of lacquer on it, and it feels okay. It kind of has that plastic encased, sealed lacquer feel to it. But the way it turned out, I had to lacquer it to try to keep the tone even on it. If I had to do it again, I'm not quite sure how I would do it. Maybe I would try a water-based stain. There's the knob. Again, it looks fine. They look brand new. It wasn't quite the look that I was going for. And there's the rest of the plane, and it works like a champ.